so much for taking the time to be here tonight. I think we'll have brilliant inputs from all our speakers. Quick disclosure, I'm not from Greenbus and I'm also not from Toko, so I'll really be as neutral as can be. I'm a junior researcher at the University of St. Gallen, and it will be my pleasure to show you through the evening. A quick overview of the program tonight. After a brief introduction to the topic by myself, we will hear individual speaker presentations from the four speakers that we have tonight. We have Dr. Delton Chen, we have Joe Pretorius, we have Professor Regina Betz, and we have Patrick Hochstetter. We will then move on to the panel discussion and a Q&A before we move on to the apéro, which I know you're all eagerly awaiting, because that's where you get the chance to chat one-on-one with our speakers. Now, carbon is at the heart of all life on our planet. You could say that carbon is the currency of life. But carbon as a currency itself has only very recently been popularized in broader media, namely by this book right here, which is called The Ministry for the Future by Kim Stanley Robinson. I see a lot of you nodding already in the audience, so I assume you've read it. For those who haven't read it, the book was first published in 2020, and it's in the genre climate fiction, cli-fi, and it follows the story of a newly created UN agency in the wake of a deadly wet bulb temperature heat wave in India, which killed millions. This new ministry is then tasked with finding solutions to the imminent challenges that we face with climate change. The Paris Agreement from 2015 aims to cap global warming at 1.5 degrees Celsius, but existing climate policies are estimated to really only cap it at 2.5 to 2.9 degrees Celsius. So, the growing emissions of our economies endanger human civilization as a whole, but also the planetary ecosystem. How can we effectively mitigate climate change, and fast at that? Here's what Kim Stanley Robinson says. In the following days, the representatives of the central banks kept meeting in the same room. And while the Zürichsee provided emotional guidance by way of a succession of brilliantly sunny days, marked by tall clouds like galleons sailing over the lake as if carrying vast treasure, the central bankers finally invented a proposal they could all agree on. It was as bold as anyone could want, and Mary felt that none of the central bankers there would have touched the plan with a 10-foot pole if all of them weren't in it together to take the heat sure to follow. They would issue together a single new currency coordinated through the Bank for International Settlements. 1 coin per ton of carbon dioxide equivalent sequestered from the atmosphere, either by not burning what would have been burned in the ordinary course of things, or by pulling it back out of the air. They promised to establish a floor in the value of this carbon coin, which exposed them to great danger from speculators trying to scare money out of the plan. And they foretold a rise in the value of the currency over the coming decades. By doing these things, they made this investment a sure thing, assuming civilization itself survived. The book explores approaches to mitigate the effects of climate change, not only with projects in the field, but by changing the very structures of our financial systems. Kim Stanley Robinson recently received an honorary doctorate for his work from the University of Zurich. And while it's normally from fiction to life, in this case it was from life to fiction, as Kim Stanley Robinson's work was greatly inspired by one of our speakers present tonight. And with that, it's my great pleasure to announce the first speaker, Dr. Delton Chen. He is the founder of the Global Carbon Reward Initiative, and by training he is a civil engineer with expertise, and I have to quote, climate mitigation, groundwater, mining, impact assessment, and geothermal energy. He calls himself an interdisciplinary analyst, and he loves to solve complex problems. The floor is yours, Delton.
Thank you, Vera. Grüezi miteinander. First, I'd like to say thanks to Greenbuzz and Tokos for inviting me to speak today. They asked me to explain how to save the planet in 7 minutes. I've included the plan both in English and German to help. Some of you may have heard of planetary boundaries. If you're familiar with it, from Johan Rockström and his colleagues, it talks about parts of the Earth system which are going too far to dangerous levels of interruption and damage. If you look at them, climate change, the biosphere, land, freshwater, nitrogen, phosphorus, acidification, atmosphere, and so on, really they're all directly or indirectly related to the carbon cycle. The planetary boundaries, particular, therefore, is a story about the carbon cycle. And carbon, unfortunately, it can create or cause feedback loops in both directions. Feedback loops that neutralise our emissions, stabilise the climate, but when we have forest fires, for example, the Amazon's drying out and burning, it puts more greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, and that's a positive feedback loop. And if we push it too far, we'll have tipping points. For example, the Atlantic circulation could change, and that's a tipping point. Next slide, please. So these are the effects of the carbon cycle being disrupted. What are the causes? Well, interestingly, the cause is the economy and the financial system. So I was looking at this problem since 2014, trying to understand how to price carbon with a currency-like instrument. And from that work, I've developed a new economic theory. You can read it if you like. And it's in a policy paper, and we're calling for partners to demonstrate the policy. So we're currently finishing our development phase, and we're looking to demonstrate. And it was mentioned in 2020, the Ministry of the Future came out, and the policy has been mentioned in some papers and international conferences. Next slide, please. Carbon currency. So what I discovered after all this time thinking about the problem is that we need a special unit of account. It sets the context for the financial mechanism. It's a little bit mysterious, but I argue we need 1 tonne of strategically mitigated carbon for 100 years or more. Strategically mitigated is a special term. It says we need flexibility in the way we finance mitigation to cover all of the things we need to do. It's issued based on results. This currency is not for purchasing goods. It's not a medium of exchange, and it's not a carbon credit. And that alone makes it very different because many people assume it's going to be a carbon credit or a crypto. The main function of the carbon currency, which is given the ticker XCC, that's a special code for it, the main function actually is to help reallocate trillions of dollars of financial capital in the global financial system. And I'll explain how that works a bit later. Next slide, please. This is the financial mechanism. Step 1. We need a carbon exchange authority, a new institution under the UN. It has the ability to create and issue the XCC, carbon currency, to projects. The projects receive the XCC if they sign a contract. These are long-term contracts, and it can be issued for all kinds of industry, cleaner energy, and removing carbon from the atmosphere. Now, on the left side, these activities are the supply of the XCC, supply of the carbon currency, but price discovery requires demand. Where does demand come from? In this financial mechanism, it comes from the currency market. So the Forex is the largest, most liquid market in the world. It trades $3 trillion every 24 hours, and we'll find demand from all the people who trade money, corporates, banks, and the public. If there is not enough demand, then central banks step in as guarantors and buy enough of the carbon currency to keep the price where it's supposed to be. And they do that by expanding the money supply. They create a national currency called bank reserves. So that's it in a nutshell, supply, demand, and I'll explain the next slide. This is the global carbon budget. We're supposed to avoid the grey at the top, mitigation, and we need to remove carbon from the atmosphere. So the first thing is the policy pays for removal and storage, fully funded, explicit price, but our policy's got special mechanisms where we can offer customised prices or customised rewards for all kinds of clean energy and decarbonisation. Finally, Channel 3, we can offer reward adjustments for community well-being, ecosystem health and energy reliability, and these are the virtuous investment choices. Next slide, please. Now, this is the forcing function for the policy. It's not so easy to understand at first, but basically we have the orange line, which is the price floor, and this is what we set in the policy. It's rising so that we get more and more mitigation, carbon removal, and as we set the price floor, the open market will buy it and trade it, and that's the squiggly line. It's, supply, demand, natural discovery. But if the spot price falls below the floor, that's when the central banks step in with purchases. And that explains how it works, noting that we're creating market sentiment or market demand with this floor, if you understand. Next slide, please. I've got 1 minute left. With the carbon currency, it's a very powerful tool. You can do things with it that you couldn't do with carbon taxes or cap and trade. It's just that the idea hasn't really been explored by economists. And one major tool or utility is to fund energy asset exchanges. So the world is actually planning to extract twice as much fossil fuels as 1.5 allows, 70% too much for 2 degrees. And what we're going to do is we're going to buy those fossil fuels where we need to keep the fossil fuels in the ground. But the energy companies or the owners of the reserves, they will need to sign a contract where they're going to use most of that carbon currency to build out renewable energy. And this way we can rapidly decarbonise the energy sector. Moreover, we can target this approach to parts of the world that are biodiverse and at risk to the negative impacts of fossil extraction and other problems, such as the Usuni National Park in Ecuador, the Amazonia, the Congo Basin across Africa and Southeast Asia, all those important forest regions. We'll also use the policy to coordinate with industry to make sure supply and demand of energy are matched, and we can reduce debt stress for developing countries. And so I think this particular approach will be revolutionary, and that's what we want to demonstrate. So I think that's the end of my presentation. Thank you.
Before I let you go, what are the 3 main reasons this solution hasn't taken off yet?
Okay. Reason number 1, our policy paper hasn't yet been properly published and disseminated to all the smart people in the world who should read it. And number 2, we need money to make all this happen. And number 3, intellectuals and institutions have biases. They believe in things like carbon taxes, credit markets, carbon offsetting, cap and trade as the solution. So the main challenge here is that we're introducing a new conceptual model and a new paradigm. And when you have a new paradigm, it's actually very challenging to have people change their worldview.
Brilliant. With that, thank you so much.
Thank you.